The reason why we recommend all of our clients use video as opposed to audio only is because you can get more use out of every content piece because you can target a wider array of platforms, right? If you record video, then you can also put your content onto YouTube. You can also put your content onto Rumble. You can also put your content onto TikTok, right? So on and so forth. Where if you do just audio, you're going to be limited to the audio platforms like Amazon Music, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, which are by no means small platforms. But when you do video, you get the benefit of also hitting some of the other largest platforms in the world like YouTube and TikTok and whatnot.
Welcome to PBP.FM, brought to you by Push Button Podcasts, your go-to resource for grabbing attention, building awareness, and creating authority in your marketplace. I'm Richard Matthews, your host and guide through the wonderful world of podcasting as a driver of business. Here, we teach how to use a multimedia podcast as the cornerstone of your omnipresent content marketing strategy. Whether you're an entrepreneur, podcaster, expert, or thought leader, you'll discover creative ways to leverage your digital content. From blogs to video, from YouTube to TikTok, and everything in between. I'll show you how to stand out from the noise so you can directly connect with potential customers, build strategic partnerships, and drive leads into your business. Get ready for actionable tips and tangible takeaways on improving your digital presence across the board. With that, let's dive into this week's episode of PBP.FM.
Hello and welcome to the Push Button Podcast. Today I am here with Richard Matthews and we're going to be talking about camera and camera quality when it comes to podcasting. We briefly went over why stuff like that is important in our last episode, but Richard, do you maybe want to recap?
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, thanks for being here with us again, Brandi. Really appreciate you doing the hosting for the show. And with cameras, same kind of issue that we were talking about with your microphones in last episode is that your video is going to be the same reason, right? If your video quality is not good, people will assume that's an unconscious trust signal that the other work that you do is also not good. So I think before we get too far into that, I want to briefly mention why are we talking about video with podcasts? Because podcasts traditionally, like it started off as an audio platform, like a radio show. And the term podcasting has grown to encompass almost any sort of serialized or episodic content, which is the kind of content that we're creating for our B2B business. And the reason why we recommend all of our clients use video as opposed to audio only is because you can get more use out of every content piece because you can target a wider array of platforms, right? If you record video, then you can also put your content onto YouTube. You can also put your content onto Rumble. You can also put your content onto TikTok, right? So on and so forth. Where if you do just audio, you're going to be limited to the audio platforms like Amazon Music, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, which are by no means small platforms. But when you do video, you get the benefit of also hitting some of the other largest platforms in the world like YouTube and TikTok and whatnot. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. It's also, I want to mention, I don't know about a lot of people, but I know people my age, we don't really browse through Spotify or Apple Music or anything like that to find new content to take in. We typically go to more video-based platforms like YouTube, TikTok, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a really important point. We call that in the marketing world discoverability. And discoverability is a really important piece of growing your podcast. You want people to be able to discover your content. And particularly with the short form platforms like TikTok and YouTube Shorts and even Facebook Reels, those are things that you're regularly getting fed content from new creators. And that's where like the short content from your podcast can pop into people's feeds and they'll get that first little taste of who you are, right? And what you talk about. And if they interact with your video and watch it or maybe even like it or comment on it, they're going to start seeing more and more of your stuff. And that's where you get people, once you've whet their appetite a little bit, then they start moving on to the longer form platforms. I call it YouTube Longs now, which is, I know, not the name for it, but it cracks me up. So YouTube Shorts, YouTube Longs, and your podcast platforms where you'll have the opportunity to have that deeper relationship with them. So doing video gives you the opportunity to have that discoverability on top of the audio platforms. So that's a quick reason why you want to have video. And then why your video quality is important is the same thing that we talked about last week. You don't want your message to be missed because your video quality and your audio quality are not there. Now, I do want to make an important point. The video quality is not nearly as detrimental to your audience as your audio quality is. So if your video quality happens to be a bit shoddy, but your audio quality is on point, you will not lose as many people as if your audio quality was terrible. So your audio quality is like the 80-20 and your video quality is that other 20%. Like you want to make sure your video quality is good, but it doesn't have to be Hollywood production to get someone to pay attention to you, especially if you have a good microphone and your message can be heard clearly. So that's just a short recap on why video and why video quality is important. And with that, I guess we can start talking about how to do it.
Yeah, so how would someone go about getting a camera that's pretty good? Someone that might have limited knowledge on camera equipment.
Yeah, just like we talked about last time, almost all of your devices that you have are going to have a built-in camera, right? So if you're talking about your laptop, right? I'm working off my laptop here, or maybe you're working from your tablet. They'll have the built-in, if you're on a Mac side, they call them the FaceTime cameras, right? On most of your Windows side, they're going to call them the webcam that's built in. And the webcam that's built in is going to be just shy of good enough, where it's probably it will be passable, but it won't be high quality. A lot of your built-in face cams are gonna be like 720p. 720p is a reference to the number of pixels along the short side of the video, right? So that's that side over here. And for the most part, the high definition video feed is gonna be 1080p, which is 1080 pixels along this side versus 720 pixels along this side. And so you wanna get, at minimum, a 1080p camera. Most of your built-in webcams are not gonna be 1080p, and even if they are, that high of a resolution on that small of a sensor is going to not look great regardless, because it's
Mhm.
just such a small camera. For the purposes of our discussion, we're going to assume you want to have something a little bit better than what's built into your device. Now, I do wanna caveat that a little bit, because when you're talking about devices like your cell phone, you have a couple of camera options on here. You have the front camera, and then these ones have legitimate cameras on the back, right? That are much larger, and you can see the difference, right? I don't know if you can actually see the little holes there, a little itty bitty hole for the camera on the front, and then big wide ones on the back, right? So these are more substantial cameras. So while this camera may not be a great camera, this is that FaceTime camera, like what's on your laptop, may not be a good camera for your podcast. The ones on the back can be. And so our first sort of hardware piece that we recommend for people is, if you don't want to or don't have the budget to set up a camera yet, the camera that you have on your cell phone is probably going to be the back camera specifically that you have on your cell phone will probably be right at that point where it is good enough quality that you can get away with it. And so I want to make a couple of points about that. So the first one is that if you don't know yet whether or not you want to commit to doing a video podcast, right? You're not sure you're going to show up every week and do the work and put in the effort and whatnot. It may make sense to use something that you already have instead of investing into more gear. See if, as you're testing the waters and getting into that before you commit to spending the chunk of change that it costs to get nicer equipment. And then the other thing that I want to point out is that I've recorded probably more than 150 episodes off of the camera on this phone on my podcast. It's a substantially good quality camera on the back of here. If you have the couple of other things set up that we talk about, have a good backdrop, have a good mic, have good lighting, this camera holds its own. And
Mhm.
the other caveat for that is going to be the age of the device. And so I've got a background in professional videography and professional photography. And so I have, and we'll talk about this in a minute, I have professional camera gear that I shot with my podcast for many years. And every time a new device came out, one of these new cell phones, I would do a direct comparison and see, can I use this in place of my professional video equipment? And I couldn't for many years, right? All the way, I had the iPhone 10, the iPhone 11. And it wasn't until the iPhone 13 when I direct compared them and I was like, oh, the quality on this camera is good enough that unless I'm pixel peeping, that's a term that us photographers use when we really zoom into something and to see, well, can I
Right.
see the individual eyelashes on someone's eyebrows and that kind of stuff? Unless I'm pixel peeping, I can't tell the difference between the camera that's built in on my already owned cell phone and the $2,500 camera and lens combo setup that I have here, right?
Mhm.
And so that's a big win for people who, because there's a lot of people who have the iPhone 13, iPhone 14, iPhone 15, and then the Android equivalents, right, which is the Galaxy S22, and I don't know the brand, the rest of the numbers through there, but anything from this sort of generation and newer, these cameras are good enough to trick someone who doesn't know what they're looking at into thinking you have a professional video setup, which is,
Mhm.
again, all we're looking for. So that's a really big win for people because you don't have to invest in a camera if you have one of these. I challenge you, if you want to go look at our other podcast, The Hero Show, that I run, episodes probably 100 to 250 are all done with a cell phone. The ones before that are done with a professional camera. You probably can't tell too much of a difference. You might even prefer the video out of one of these. So that's a cool point that you can use a cell phone like this. And we'll talk a little bit more here in a second on some things that make this work. But what are your thoughts on having a camera like this just available for you already?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's awesome that we're getting so much more accessible with recording equipment and things like that. We had mentioned that last time that the microphones on newer phones are actually pretty decent as well. But yeah, it's super cool and it opens a lot of doors on what you can do with recording.
Yeah. And with a microphone like the ones that we recommended, either this one or the other ones that we recommended, all the microphones that we recommended on our thing will plug into your phone, so you can use your phone as the camera and use a really nice microphone with it and overcome any of the audio limitations that might come with the passable microphones that are on here and move into the high quality ones. Now, there's a couple of drawbacks to using a device like this for your camera. So, one of them is how you connect it to your computer, right? So, if you are in the Apple ecosystem and you have a Mac laptop and your Apple phone and your laptop are all on the newest operating systems, they have a system called Continuity Camera that'll automatically connect the two, and your camera will show up just as a webcam in any of your devices that you might be recording in, like Zoom or Squadcast or Riverside or any place that you might record your podcast. It'll just show up as a webcam and be super simple, super easy to use. With the caveat being that you are transferring the video signal wirelessly, and sometimes you can have a delay, a lag between your lips moving and the sound coming through. To improve that, you want to pick up your plug-in, right, your actual wired connection and connect it to your computer, and it'll still let you access the thing, but you won't have nearly as much of the lag on there. So it does turn it into a whole wired sort of setup, and you have to plug it in and unplug it. And then the other thing is because it's your phone is something that you're not going to leave set up in your studio all the time. So you
Mhm.
have to have something that you can plug it in and unplug it and use it when you need to use it. You'll also need to get familiar with the iOS side, but the focus modes, right? So they have the ability to put them on do not disturb or whatever, so that you don't get phone calls or other notifications that interrupt your using it as a camera. And so you make sure you have those things set up. There's probably something similar on the Android side where you put it in do not disturb mode for your podcast, however long it is. Isn't going to be interrupted. You can use the camera here. And then the other side of that is if you are using a mixed sort of setup where maybe you have an iPhone, but you have a Windows PC, or you're using an Android device with a Mac, or you're using an Android device with a Windows PC, any sort of combination outside of iPhone, Mac, you'll have to have a software interface that lets your phone work as a webcam on your computer. And the one that we found the best for that is something called Camo Studio, and that's CAMO Studio. We'll put a link for that in the description. It costs about $5 a month, and then it allows you to plug your camera, plug your phone into your computer and use it as a webcam. And it doesn't matter which operating system you're on or which camera or which iPhone you have or which Android device or which Google Pixel you have. It'll work with all the phones and all the operating systems. You pay that $5 a month for it, and it turns it into a webcam that gives you a lot of control over it. It's just a little extra bit of setup, but then that software shows up in all of your recording platforms to let you use your cell phone as your main camera. And again, our main benefit for cell phone as main camera is that you probably already have the camera. So if you want to
Mhm.
get started today, you don't need to make the investment to buy extra gear. You can just get it going, get your first couple of episodes out. It is more important to consistently get content out than to have the best camera on the market, right? That's cell phones. Any other thought on cell phones for the first sort of like rung of the ladder for doing good video?
I mean, not too much, but yes, I do want to put out there, like you said, that having consistent content is much more important than always having the best camera. Like, I've seen a lot of the podcasts or YouTubers that I watch when they take a break, not take a break, but they have to travel somewhere, they'll use lower quality equipment, but they'll keep that upload schedule the same. I know it's not 100% what we're talking about here, but I think it is very important to note that consistent uploads are very important to doing well.
Yeah. The consistency over time will have more impact than anything else we talk about. I think we already did an episode on this earlier in our show, and you'll probably hear us beat that like a broken record all the way through our podcast. That consistency over time is the biggest thing that will help you succeed with any sort of online content, but podcasting in particular. And yeah, if you see this, you'll actually probably see this if you go through any channel that you like on YouTube. Just go back to their very first video and then their newest videos, and you can probably watch over the course of time their video quality get better as they get better and better equipment or work on things. So my point is, you can absolutely start with your cell phone, get the content out, get your message out, figure out if you like doing this, all those kind of things, and get yourself right on the go. So that's number one. Number two then would be your dedicated webcams. And the dedicated webcams are both excellent and a little bit of a minefield because just like the microphones, the pandemic changed the market dramatically for webcams.
Mhm.
And so if you go back pre-2020, webcams were, well, to put it mildly, they were horrible. They were not good. They were not the kind of thing that you would want to do production quality work with. and you would be much better served with a professional camera than almost any webcam on the market. And because of the shift to work from home work and the shift to a lot of virtual meetings, all of the webcam manufacturers, very similar to the microphone manufacturers, dramatically upped their game because the market changed for it. And then there's a couple other things that happened along the same time, right? The 5G started coming out, so a lot of people had access to higher bandwidth internet, which, allows for higher quality video transfers and higher quality audio. So there's just a lot of technology things that happened over the last 3 or 4 years that have made the market shift for higher quality webcams. So with that in mind, there's several really good webcam manufacturers out there that are making high quality, really good webcams right now. Logitech has a really good 4K web camera. Opal, I believe, they have a really cool one. I think it's called the C1. That's a good 4K camera. There's one, I can't remember the name of it. I think it's the Insta i360 has like a gimbal one that's really nice. And that's a cool camera. Then, of course, the ones that we recommend, and again, we only recommend gear that we've actually used. The ones that we recommend are the Elgato Facecam Pros, and they have two models of that. They have the Mark II, the 1080p camera. That's the one that you and I are both on right now. So if you like this video quality, that's what you're seeing here is that Elgato MK2. And then they have a 4K version of that if you are interested in having the higher pixel density. And so I want to talk briefly about the pixel density, right? Because we talked about the 1080 being this line of the shortest line. When you go to 4K, that means 4,000 pixels of data or so. It's 4,024, something like that, along this side rather than 1080. So it's literally 4 times the amount of pixels. And so the question we get from clients a lot is, why might I choose a 4K video rather than a 1080 video? And so I want to go over that just very briefly because it's a useful conversation. And the useful part of it is like, why would you want 4 times as many pixels if the actual outcome is going to be a 1080p video on YouTube? And someone like you do a little bit of video editing, I do a little bit of video editing. Our video editors on our team do lots of video editing. But what it does is it gives you a bit more latitude, I guess, in the editing room to say, hey, you know what? I want to maybe cut out a word or cut out something in the editing room. And then instead of having a hard jump cut where someone is, I can do like a zoom in, right? Zoom into their face a little bit and it'll cover your cuts, right? So you can have a little bit more leverage in the editing room when you have a higher quality video feed to make the production on what comes out the other side look really good and not have any degradation of quality when you do zoom ins or zoom outs or jump cuts and stuff like that. For the kind of video work that we're doing, you're not going to output a 4K video because we're not watching these on 4K TVs. And, if you've ever been into Best Buy and you see their fancy like birds and frogs and whatnot, like that's not what we're looking to create. But the 4K video can give you a little bit more leverage in there with a couple of caveats. Again, you're going to have dramatically larger file sizes, which is going to make your moving files back and forth more difficult. It's going to take more time and a more powerful computer to do editing, and it's going to take more storage for all those things. So for the most part, especially with a guest like you and I, there's 2 of us on the screen. So our final output is like if you're watching this on YouTube, my picture started off as a 1080p picture and your picture started off as a 1080p picture. And so we took both of those and put them on one screen, and then that screen is 1080 pixels. And so we actually have some of that same latitude where we're not actually showing a full 1080 view of my face and a full 1080 view of your face. We're showing a bit smaller amount of pixels there. So we can do some of the same stuff and have some of the same latitude. So in 95% of the cases, the less expensive 1080p cameras are going to be really good for the type of work that we're doing. And if you happen to be like, you know what, I just have to have the best one, or I know what I want to do in the editing room, you can switch up to the 4K ones. I'm actually going to be purchasing the 4K one for this podcast for some of those exact same reasons. But we're also in the business of pushing the limits of what people do with podcasting. So it makes sense for us to do that. So does that make sense? Any other thoughts there on why 1080 versus 4K?
That makes a lot of sense. I do want to mention that before you look into getting a 4K camera, it's very important, even if you want that super high video quality, to make sure that your computer can handle a 4K camera. For example, I'm running all of this off of a $3,000 gaming PC, and it still, when I had a 4K camera, struggled a little bit to be able to run that.
Yeah,
That
'cause
could
it's
be
pushing a
because I
lot of
built this
data.
computer. Yeah. It could be because I built this computer a while ago, or more so that it's more meant for gaming rather than recording. But just make sure that you definitely research into what the computer requirements are for the camera you're looking into, and make sure that your computer is of high enough quality to match that, or else.
That's a really good point, actually. And if you've ever played in the iPad space, the iPads are really interesting there. So Apple switched from their Intel chips to their Apple silicone chips in the iPads a couple of years ago. I was like 2 or 3 years ago. And I had one of the previous ones. And then we also got one of the newer ones with the M1 chips in it that my son has now. And it was interesting to me to see, because 4K is fairly new. And so everything was 1080 before. So all of the processors were optimized to be able to handle a couple of 1080p video feeds. And so my older iPad could handle one or two 1080p video feeds just fine.
Mm-hmm.
When we were either recording, when we were editing, no problem. But as soon as we put a 4K video feed in there, it couldn't handle it because the processor didn't have the capabilities of doing that because it wasn't a thing they had for when they were building the processors or building the GPUs, which is probably where you're at, right? You have a really nice high-end computer, but if you built it like 3 years ago or before, it wasn't even something they could optimize for because it didn't exist yet. But when they switched over to the Apple Silicon ones, like the M1 chips, they built 4K processing capabilities into the chips. And so like now my son's iPad, for instance, which is running, I think it's got like an M2 chip in it. It can handle like
Mm-hmm.
4 8K feeds at once in the editing software, right? Whereas
Yeah.
previous generation couldn't even handle one. But it's just because it's on the cusp of like, oh, this technology didn't exist last year and it does exist this year. Now the processes are designed to handle it. So that's a
Right.
really important point. So if you have a computer that is probably computer or a tablet that is pre like 2022, it probably can't handle the 4K footage. So you'll be better served by the 1080p cameras.
Right.
And again, the only reason I would even bring that up is if you are looking to push the limits or you're like me and you like to have the best quality stuff all the time just because you might be
Yeah.
interested in the 4K footage.
I mean, if you have a computer that's like the big tower, you can kind of break it down and just replace your graphics card and add some RAM to it, and you should be good to go. But other computers, you might just have to upgrade the whole thing.
Yeah, like I have a laptop, right? And if I wanted to, this was what I did. I went from a 5 or 6 year old laptop to one of these newer ones, and it blew me away. I was like, wow, it can handle all the video stuff, no problems. Really nice. On that point, the Elgato cameras that we recommend, we've tested both of them. They're both fantastic. The 1080p, which is the Mark II, or the 4K Pro is the other one. The other thing that goes along with that is you're going to spend about twice as much money on the 4K camera than you will on the
Mhm.
1080p camera for essentially just some gains in the editing room, right? And a lot more file storage. So if you are really interested in those gains, there's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, we're doing it internally. We're playing with those things and using them. It could
Mhm.
be something, but our recommendation, go for the 1080p cameras and the Elgato Facecam, the Mark II one. I think it's 129 bucks. It's a fantastic camera. And as you can see, the video quality is really good. You put a couple of good lights on it, good microphone, and it looks like we're in a professional studio and even has the blurring that you can see that makes it looks really nice. That's the webcam game is where we're at now. And that's what we use for our podcasts. And then the biggest benefit of stepping up from an iPhone to a webcam for me, and this is probably kind of the kind of thing you've noticed as well, is I don't have to worry about setup every time. Like already here, it's sitting where I need it to be sitting. So when I want to record, I just have to sit in the recording room and click on, right? I don't have to set up a tripod. I don't have to make sure plug in my camera. I don't have to turn on the right software. I don't have to plug in the phone and put it on do not disturb. I don't have to do any of those things. It's just ready to go. Turn it on, go. That is for me. I know you've heard us talk about this on the podcast before. The psychological barriers to action, the more of those you can remove, and the simpler it is for you to sit down and just hit the record button, the more likely you'll do it. And the more likely you'll have that consistency that will actually get you the success that you want.
That's perfect. I mean, I don't have any other thoughts on that. You were talking about we had 3 different levels. So what's that last level if someone really wants to go above and beyond with?
Are you ready to amplify your influence and stand out from the noise? Join Richard Matthews on pbp.fm as he explores the power of podcasting, social media, and strategic content to boost your reach. You'll discover the latest trends in video, audio, and influencer marketing, plus unlock insider tips to create binge-worthy content spotlighting you as a leader. With upbeat energy and clear, empowering advice, Richard guides publishers, experts, and entrepreneurs on starting a podcast, improving social strategy, and connecting with your perfect audience. Visit pbp.fm and book a podcast strategy session to start spreading your message today.
So the last level is for your super nerds that are like me or the people who are just getting to the point where you have a large enough audience where you might have a professional studio in place or you're getting to that point where you're like, hey, I really want to edge out all of my competition in a particular niche or something like that. You want to next level what you're doing. and you're beyond the point where you know consistency is important. You've got a good schedule in place. You know you're showing up all the time. You got audience coming in. You got money coming in either from your partnerships or from other things. And you're like, okay, it's time to take that 80/20 and start adding on that 20%. That's where you might start stepping up into professional video gear. And the professional video gear is the same thing, right? We're still recording on our computer, so we need a webcam. And so there's a couple of pieces of equipment that you'll need. And so I'm going to show these off here. This is my professional camera equipment. This is an A6500 from Sony and their 30 millimeter DN lens. This is a really nice camera setup. This setup here, when it was brand new, was about $2,500 worth of camera equipment. And the Sony makes a couple of new ones. I think the newest one is an A6400. I could be wrong on that. And, I don't want to date our video too much, but every year Sony comes out with new cameras, Canon comes out with new cameras, Nikon comes out with new cameras. Our recommendation, generally speaking, is going to be whatever they have generally 3 levels of cameras. They have their consumer level cameras, their prosumer level cameras, and then their professional cameras. And you can generally tell which ones they are by their price points. Under $1,000 is consumer cameras, probably won't work for what we want to do here. Then your prosumer cameras generally start off in the $1,000 to $2,500 range. And then the professional cameras tend to be up in the $2,500 to $6,000 range for the cameras. And you can just pop onto any YouTube channel that reviews camera gear and get all the information you needed on which ones you might like. I am a huge fan of the Sony cameras because they're really easy to use. And the mirrorless versions of them, they're nice, small, and compact. You can see this is not a big piece of equipment where you can definitely get bigger ones. So the mirrorless cameras are a nice combination of a good sized camera and really high quality output. And you can get years and years of use out of these, right? I believe the A6500 was released in 2015 or 2016. This camera can hold its own against any of the cameras that are out today if you have good lighting and you know what you're doing with the camera. And it's a fantastic piece of equipment that I will probably continue to use for several more years. I'd probably get a decade or more out of a camera like this for use for that. And the other part of it is this is a little more complicated because it's not just a camera, it's a camera and a lens combo, right? This is the camera. This is what you pay the $1,500 for. And then you have to figure out what lens you want to use to go with it. And the lens is really where a lot of your image quality is going to come from. That's where you'll start to get some of the benefits of moving to a big camera like this. You'll have a much wider aperture lens, so you can let in more light. It's called bokeh. So if you ever played with like portrait mode on the iPhone or on the Androids where it tries to blur the background and like cut you out a little bit, cameras do that for real. That professional look that they're trying to mimic comes from this big hunkin' piece of glass, right? This glass gives you that cool professional look. And so if you like that professional look and you want to set it up like that, this is really your only option to get that and make it look really good. So this is a great way to do that. But the caveats, this is a lot more complex, right? You have to know how to set aperture. You have to know how to set shutter speeds. You have to know how to set ISO. You have to know how to put it in the correct modes. There's a whole lot of learning that goes into using a professional camera, right? A real camera to do that kind of work. And so you either have to put in the work to learn that stuff or hire someone who knows how to do it. And again, depending on where you're at with your podcast and what you're doing with it, you might be at that point already. That's the first one. You need a piece of gear like this, and you need a way to turn this into something that'll record on your computer. That's where a little device like this comes in. This is called a CamLink 4K. This is also from Elgato. You've heard a lot of us talking a lot about Elgato. They make the Stream Decks, they make the light that we're using, they make the webcams that we're using, and they make these capture cards. So this capture card does a couple of things for us. So what it does is gives you an HDMI port on one side and a USB port on the other. So the USB port plugs into your computer, and then the HDMI port plugs in to your camera. So you can take the other side of your HDMI port, and this is just a shrinker. It shrinks into miniature HDMI, and all of your cameras are going to have an HDMI port on the side. You plug it in, and now your camera has been turned into a webcam, right? Just like the Elgato cameras that we're talking about, I now have a webcam version of my very fancy professional setup because of this little box here. This little box runs about $180. So to run a professional setup like this, you're looking at $2,500 in camera lens gear, $180 for one of these, plus a tripod to put it up, and then the know-how to make it all work. But the quality difference is going to be in that bokeh. It's going to be in the amount of light that you have to use and some other things. What I have come to the conclusion of is that the ease of use and simplicity of using a webcam, especially the newer ones, versus this one, I have all the gear. I just showed it to you, right? I have all of it. I don't use it anymore, which makes me a little bit sad because I'm a gear nerd and I really like having all this gear and playing with it and using it and all that stuff. But to me, the time that it takes to set this up, this takes me about 20 minutes every time I want to record to get it set up in the right spot and to do all the things that I want to do with it. I don't have the luxury of being able to leave it in place like some larger studios might have, right? Because we're in the back bedroom of an RV. And so I have to take all this stuff down when I'm done. So this has to be taken down and the stuff has to be taken off of it. And I have to reset the settings and whatnot every time. it's the benefits for the quality are not worth it to me, despite the fact that I own it all and I've paid for it all and I do like it and I know how to use it. I don't exactly know where to go with that other than to say it is viable. And there's a lot of people who create content who use this type of gear, and there's nothing wrong with it, right? It's in fact really, really good and it will set you apart from your competition, but it's not required. And we continue to have great success with our podcasts just using the mid level gear that we talked about with the webcams and the microphones and whatnot. So that's professional equipment. If you want to get more into this, this is where like our videos here and the stuff we talk about on this podcast, we're not going to get too much into this professional gear stuff because there's channels that are dedicated entirely just to learning how to use this stuff in your studio. Any thoughts on the professional gear?
Yeah, not too much. Just like you said, it definitely is a very prime example of how much time are you willing to put in every time you want to record to set up and those kind of psychological blocks to recording. If you're already dragging yourself to record and then you have to set up for 20 minutes before you even start, it can definitely deter you away from wanting to record as much rather than a setup like what I have where I just pretty much sit down, pull my microphone out and hit go.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of the sit down, pull my microphone out and hit go, hit record. And like so much so that like we'll get into when we talk backdrops. Like I put my backdrop on a little clicky button thing. So I don't even have to worry about putting my backdrop up and down, right? I'm super into the easier it is for me to record, the more I'll record and the more I will record, the more that impacts my bottom line in my business. And
Mhm.
so for me, because we're talking B2B, we're talking businesses, we're talking using podcasts as a way to create content for your business and to create attention and awareness for your business and thought leadership for your business. What matters to me is how do I get the content out? And the difference in quality from this one to this one is not noticeable enough for the type of content that we're doing for it to be worth the extra work. So that's where that is. And like I said, I'm not that I'm going to deter you. If you're one of those people, we got at least one of our clients who's really into all the gear and he wants to purchase it all and set it all up and use it and learn how to use it. Nothing wrong with that. And they have the revenue and everything to support all of that. And they're trying to build a really big brand with their stuff. And if that's where you're at and what you want to do, it's a perfectly viable option. It is going to be more work. You're going to have a bit more setup that goes into it. You will get the benefits of the extra quality that come with the higher end things, particularly that bokeh that comes with those really nice lenses and that fall off. I believe even if like this one, this fall off where you see my hand get a little bit blurry, that's done digitally. That's done with the camera and stuff is trying to figure out where my face is where versus where it's not. I could probably confuse it a little bit, right? Right there, you can see my hand is still in focus and my face is still in focus. That wouldn't happen with a professional camera, would focus on just my hand or just my face. But if I move back here, you'll see it's out of focus. I mean, it'll try and focus on a little bit because I can confuse the digital stuff, right? But you can't confuse the optical one. It'll focus on your face and that's what it'll focus on. And you'll have that beautiful blur, professional looking stuff. And those of us who are camera nerds will be able to tell whether or not you're using a high-end camera or not.
Right.
But the rest of the world won't. I think it's important to note there. I think that does a pretty good job of covering you basically your three levels of cameras, right? The ones you have in your pocket already will work and you can get away with that, especially if you're just getting started and you're like, I need to get some content out and get going. Use your phone before you want to drop the change on a real webcam. Our recommendation is any of the high-end 1080p cameras from the last couple of years. The Elgato MK2 is our favorite. And if you happen to be a super nerd, you can step up to the gear and get something like that for your setup. So yeah,
You got anything else for him?
I think that's probably it. Probably the only other thing I'd want to point out is just that we've used all of these internally, right? So we've used the cell phones, we've used the webcams, we've used the professional camera gear. And the point that I would want to make for people is that they all work, right? Like even the built-in web camera on your laptop will work. And so what we're looking to optimize for is we're looking to optimize for the cost for the gear that you're putting in, right? We don't want to spend a whole ton of money on gear that doesn't get used does not add to your bottom line, right? Gear
Right.
that's overkill for what you're doing doesn't add to your bottom line. So what we're looking at is what's the sort of minimum viable product? What's going to make sure that it's easy for you to record, you're not intimidated by the setup, so that you can get that most important bit, which is sit down and record every week. That's where the simplicity of a nice web camera, the simplicity of a couple of nice lights, the simplicity of a nice USB microphone is going to be, for us, I think, the ideal setup. And that's why we recommend the gear that we recommend for our clients.
All right. If that's all I have, then next time we're going to be talking about the actual lighting and how that works and what we'll go into
You got,
recommendations that.
you like, see, I got my
So,
fancy button. I can push the button, turn my lights off, turn my lights on. Makes me very happy. We'll talk about how you can set up lights like that Oh, there we go. She disappeared. So the on and off lights. And so we'll talk about a few different options for lights. We got some smaller lights and some bigger lights and what you're actually looking for. We'll talk about, I believe the term in the photo and video world is called 3-point lighting. So we'll talk a little bit about what that is and how to set it up so that when you actually have your studio in place, you can have the kind of look that we have, right? Very
Yeah.
important. People can see your eyes. You can see I got blue eyes. You can see Brandy's got brown eyes. Like you can see the eyes. That's a connection to the soul. And if you turn the lights off, you'll see our eyes go away, that you have much harder time connecting with your people when they can't see your eyes. So that's where the lighting is going to come in. It's going to help light up your face. It's going to help give you depth. This will show you how to set that up so that you look good on camera. And then side part of that is when you know you look good on camera, it's one of those psychological barriers, right? You're like, I'm more likely to actually sit down and record when I know, hey, I look good. And if I look good, I'm more likely to want to record. So looking good on camera, that's where the lighting is going to come in. And you can see how big of a difference that make when either of us turn our lights off. We go from looking good to looking, well, you look like a ghost,
Yeah.
almost black and white. So the looking good on camera is going to come from your lights. You don't have to have fancy lights like we have here. You can even just use incandescent bulbs. We'll show you how to use those kind of things and set them up really nicely. But your lighting is going to be a huge part of that. And that's what our next episode is going to be about. So look forward to having you in on that. And again, thank you so much for coming on doing these, Brandi. Appreciate it.
Of course. If you guys are really excited to see stuff with the lighting, make sure you subscribe, follow, whatever platform you're listening to us on, and whatever their follow button is to be able to come back and see us talk about lighting.
Awesome. We'll be back soon.
Thanks for joining us this week on pbp.fm. Make sure to visit our website, pbp.fm, where you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating on Apple Podcasts. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. And if you'd like to get help building an omnipresent content marketing strategy with a podcast and you want help, you might want to book a podcast strategy session with us at pbp.fm. Just click the Book a Strategy Session button and book a time on our calendar. We look forward to speaking with you. And be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.